By the time my own daughter accused me of destroying her grandchildren's childhood, I already knew something was terribly wrong. What nobody noticed that afternoon was the bruise hidden beneath her purple sweater sleeve. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to see it. The truth finally surfaced because of one photograph Camille thought no one would ever find. It started during one of our usual Sunday lunches. At 68, those family gatherings were the highlight of my week. Ever since my husband Vincent passed 5 years earlier, the house felt too quiet most days. Cooking for my family gave me purpose again. Our dining room had always been the center of everything. Warm lighting, fresh flowers on the table, the smell of roast beef drifting through the house since morning. I spent hours preparing meals no one seemed to appreciate anymore. Camille arrived late like always. She hurried inside with her husband Damien and the children, Isla and Noah. The second I saw her, something felt off. She moved carefully, almost stiffly, like even simple motions hurt. A mother notices things, even when everyone else pretends not to. "You didn't have to make all this, Mom," Camille said while setting down her purse. Her voice sounded tired. "It's Sunday," I said lightly. "Of course I did." I bent down to hug the kids, but they barely responded. Noah mumbled hello without looking at me. Isla kept her eyes glued to the floor. That hurt more than I liked admitting. Isla used to run into my arms the second she arrived. Now she acted like she was afraid to take up space. Damien walked in last, confident as ever, carrying that heavy energy that changed the atmosphere the moment he entered a room. Tall, broad shoulders, expensive watch, perfectly controlled smile. A smile that never reached his eyes. "Evelyn," he said with a quick nod. "Never Mom. Never anything warm. Just Evelyn." A reminder that, in his mind, I stood outside the family instead of inside it. Lunch dragged along under the usual tension. Small talk. Careful laughter. Everyone measuring every word before speaking. It felt less like a family gathering and more like a performance nobody wanted to be part of. Things finally cracked during dessert. Isla had barely touched her food all afternoon. "Sweetheart, are you feeling okay?" I asked gently while placing a slice of pie on her plate. Before she could answer, Damien spoke for her. "She's fine. Just not a fan of your cooking." The room went quiet. Camille immediately stiffened beside him. "I was only asking," I said calmly. Damien placed his fork down harder than necessary. "You're always asking questions, Evelyn." There was something chilling about how controlled his voice sounded. "Always interfering. Always acting like you know our children better than we do." "Damien," Camille whispered. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at me either. Then Isla quietly spoke. "Grandma gave me a book about families." I felt my stomach tighten. 2 weeks earlier, I'd given Isla a book about healthy family relationships. Nothing dramatic. Nothing inappropriate. Just a gentle book meant to help teenagers understand emotions and boundaries. At least that's what I thought. Damien slowly turned toward me. "So that's what this is." His expression hardened. "You're filling her head with ideas. Trying to convince her something's wrong with our family." "That isn't what happened," I started. "You always do this," he snapped. "Always hinting we're bad parents. Always trying to make yourself the hero." Then he turned to the children. "Go wait in the car." Neither child argued. They stood instantly. Too instantly. Noah walked out without a word. But Isla hesitated near the doorway. Just for a second her eyes met mine. Fear. Pure fear. Then she disappeared outside. Damien stood next. "Come on, Camille." That's when I saw it. As she pushed back her chair, her sweater sleeve slipped just enough for me to catch the dark bruise covering part of her forearm. Purple fading into yellow near the edges. Not fresh. Not the first one either. Our eyes locked. For one brief second I saw panic in hers. "Camille," I said quietly. "What happened to your arm?" She yanked the sleeve down immediately. "It's nothing. I hit the cabinet." Damien laughed softly beside her. "She's always been clumsy." Something inside me turned cold. Suddenly every uncomfortable dinner, every nervous glance, every excuse, every canceled visit started lining up in my mind like pieces of a terrible puzzle. "That doesn't look accidental," I said. I took one step closer to her. And then Camille exploded. "Stop it, Mom." Her voice shook so hard the silverware rattled. Stop interfering in my life. You're ruining my children's childhood with these accusations. Why can't you leave us alone? I couldn't move. The words hurt, but not nearly as much as the terror behind them. She kept glancing at Damien between sentences, almost like she was checking whether she'd said the right thing. Damien smiled. Cold. Satisfied. See, he said quietly. Even your own daughter doesn't want you around anymore. Then they left. The front door slammed, and the silence afterward felt unbearable. Half-eaten pie still sat on the table, coffee cups untouched. I stood there alone in my own dining room, realizing the fear I'd lived with for years had suddenly changed shape. For so long I'd been afraid of pushing too hard. Afraid they'd stop visiting. Afraid I'd lose access to the children completely. But now something worse had taken its place. Because I finally understood this wasn't just tension. It was danger. I went upstairs and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Weeks earlier, Camille had helped me organize old paperwork after the garage flooded. When she left, I discovered a plain manila folder buried beneath some photo albums. I hadn't opened it then. Part of me was afraid to know what was inside. Now my hands shook as I pulled it out. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Camille standing in bathroom mirrors with bruises on her arms. Cuts near her shoulder. Dark marks along her ribs. One photo showed her wearing a cast. Every picture had a date written neatly in the corner. Year after year. Like evidence. Like she'd been silently documenting her own suffering without ever speaking the words aloud. I sat down on the edge of the bed because my legs suddenly couldn't hold me anymore. How long had this been happening? How many signs had I ignored because believing the truth felt too painful? Then my phone vibrated. A message from Isla. Grandma, please help me. It's not just Mom. I stopped breathing for a second. Not just Camille. The children too. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the screen. And right there in my bedroom, surrounded by photographs no mother should ever have to see, I made a decision. The silence was over. I didn't care how angry Camille became. I didn't care what Damien said about me. I didn't care if the entire family turned against me. Because sometimes love means refusing to look away, even when the truth breaks your heart open. That night I barely slept. Isla's message replayed in my head over and over while the photographs remained scattered across my bed like pieces of a life I no longer recognized. By sunrise I was sitting alone in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold, trying to figure out what to do next. I forced myself to slow down. Panic wouldn't help Camille or the children. One wrong move could push them deeper under Damien's control. Or worse, make him dangerous in ways I didn't even want to imagine. So I started looking back carefully. And once I did, the signs became impossible to ignore. Cancelled holidays. Last-minute excuses. The children growing quieter every year. The way Damien answered questions for everyone before they even had a chance to speak. I picked up one of the photographs from the folder. 2012. Camille stood in front of a bathroom mirror wearing heavy makeup over a bruised eye. I remembered that Christmas vividly now. They'd canceled dinner, claiming she had the flu. Damien had answered the phone. She's sleeping, he'd said sharply when I asked to speak to her. At the time I let it go. Now I realized he never intended to let me talk to her at all. My phone rang suddenly, making me jump. Camille. I answered immediately. Mom, she said. Her voice sounded too cheerful, too careful. About yesterday. I'm sorry we left like that. Camille, I said quietly. We need to talk about your arm. Silence. Long enough to say everything she wouldn't. I told you, she finally whispered. I hit a cabinet. And the photographs? Another silence. This one heavier. The ones in the folder you left here, I continued gently. The ones you've been keeping for years. I heard her inhale sharply. You went through my things? You left them here, sweetheart. My voice cracked despite myself. I think part of you wanted me to find them. You don't understand. Her composure finally slipped. You need to forget you saw them. Then I said the one thing I knew I couldn't hold back anymore. Isla texted me. Camille stopped breathing for a second. She asked me for help. The silence that followed felt soaked in fear. Finally, in a trembling voice, she said, Damien checks her phone. A chill ran through me. If he sees those messages, Then let me help you, I said immediately. All of you. You can't. The hopelessness in her voice nearly destroyed me. No one can. Then the line went dead. I sat there holding the phone against my ear long after the call ended. For the first time I realized Camille truly believed there was no way out. And that terrified me more than the bruises. I reached for my old address book. If anyone knew what to do, it was Genevieve Laurent. We'd been friends for over 40 years, and before retiring, she'd spent decades working in social services. Genevieve had seen situations most people couldn't even imagine. 2 hours later, she sat across from me at my kitchen table studying the photographs one by one. Her face hardened with every image. "This is serious, Evelyn," she said quietly. "Very serious." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup just to steady them. "What do I do?" Genevieve looked at me carefully. "You document everything." I stared at her. "That's it? My daughter and grandchildren are suffering, and I'm supposed to take notes. It's more complicated than people think," she said gently. "If Camille denies the abuse, and she probably will out of fear, the process becomes difficult. These photos matter, but we need a pattern. Evidence. Consistency." I hated that she was right, so I started writing. Everything. Cancelled birthdays. Strange bruises. The children flinching at sudden noise. Damien isolating Camille from old friends. His habit of controlling conversations. The way money suddenly became tight after he took over their finances years ago. Once I laid it all out together, the picture became horrifyingly clear. This hadn't started recently. It had been happening for decades. I called Camille every day after that. Usually she didn't answer. When she did, her words sounded rehearsed, clipped short like someone was listening nearby. Most likely because someone was. Then Thursday night changed everything. The doorbell rang just after 8. When I opened the door, Isla stood there clutching her backpack against her chest so tightly her knuckles looked white. Her eyes were red from crying. "Grandma," she whispered, "can I stay here tonight?" I pulled her inside immediately. "Of course you can." She kept glancing nervously over her shoulder toward the street. "Does your father know you're here?" She shook her head fast. "I told them I was at Aria's house studying." Her voice trembled. "But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't go home tonight." Fear rolled off her in waves. I guided her to the couch and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "What happened?" Isla unzipped her backpack with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. "There's something you need to see." She opened a video. The moment it started playing, my stomach dropped. Damien stood in the middle of the kitchen screaming at Camille while Noah curled into himself near the wall, terrified. Dishes rattled from how hard Damien slammed his fist against the counter. His face barely looked human. "He found out Mom talked to you," Isla whispered beside me. "He took her phone and smashed it." On the screen, Camille tried to calm him down while Noah cried quietly in the background. Damien kept shouting that nobody was going to destroy his family. Nobody was going to turn his children against him. I felt sick. Isla wiped her face with trembling fingers. "Mom told me to run." I turned toward her. "What?" She waited until he went to the garage. Isla's voice cracked. "She told me to grab my bag and come here. She said you'd know what to do." My chest tightened so painfully I could barely breathe. Even now, even trapped inside that nightmare, Camille was trying to protect her children. "He's going to come looking for me," Isla whispered suddenly, staring toward the dark windows. "Once he realizes I'm not at Aria's house." I closed the curtains immediately and sat beside her again. "You're safe here." But deep down I wasn't completely sure. Men like Damien didn't surrender control quietly. "We need to call the police," I said carefully. Isla's face went pale. "No. He threatened you?" She nodded quickly. "He said if we ever called the police." Her voice disappeared completely. She couldn't finish the sentence. "What about your mother and Noah?" Isla looked down at her hands. "Mom stayed behind so Noah wouldn't be alone." That answer broke something inside me. I called Genevieve immediately. Within 20 minutes, she arrived with a woman named Serena, a social worker who specialized in domestic abuse cases. Serena sat with Isla in the living room while I made hot chocolate in the kitchen. Her voice stayed calm and gentle the entire time. Slowly, I noticed Isla's shoulders beginning to relax for the first time since arriving. Genevieve joined me quietly near the stove. "The video is strong evidence," she said in a low voice. "Combined with Isla's statement and the photographs, this changes everything." "But Damien won't let them leave," I whispered. "No," Genevieve agreed. "He won't." Serena stepped into the kitchen moments later. "We're filing for an emergency protective order tonight," she said firmly. "Based on what we have, a judge should approve it quickly." For the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Hope. "What about Camille and Noah?" I asked immediately. Serena didn't hesitate. "Once the emergency order is approved, officers will escort us to the house and remove them safely." She was already gathering paperwork while speaking. "But we need to move fast." Almost the second she finished, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Mom." Camille's voice sounded thin and shaky. "I'm using the neighbor's phone." I stood up so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. "Is Isla with you?" she whispered. "She's safe," I said immediately. "Camille, listen carefully. We're getting help right now." A sound came from her end of the line. Not crying. Fear. "He knows," she whispered. "He's been drinking." Every hair on my arm stood up. "Where's Noah?" "With me." Her breathing turned uneven. "We locked ourselves in the bathroom." My stomach dropped. "Mom, I'm scared." Serena was already beside me, holding out her hand for the phone. "Get the address," she said firmly. "Now." The next hour blurred together in fragments. Police dispatchers. Statements. Paperwork. Isla sitting frozen on my couch with both hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. Every few minutes she looked toward the front door like she expected Damien to come crashing through it. Then finally Serena's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to answer. The silence while we waited felt unbearable. When she came back, relief softened her face for the first time all night. "The police have Damien in custody," she said. Isla burst into tears instantly. "Camille and Noah are safe. Officers are bringing them here now." I pulled Isla into my arms while she cried against my shoulder. Years of fear pouring out all at once. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Camille standing there wrapped in a borrowed coat. Noah pressed tightly against her side. Her eyes were swollen red. But underneath the exhaustion I saw something else. For the first time in days, I felt something fragile but real beginning to return. "Hope." "Mom," she whispered. Then she collapsed into my arms. That night, my living room became something it hadn't been in years. Honest. No pretending. No careful smiles. No walking on eggshells. The children curled together on the couch while Serena explained the next steps. Protective orders. Court hearings. Emergency services. Counseling. Camille sat beside them silently, her hands trembling the entire time. "You're staying here," I told them firmly. "As long as you need." Camille looked at me like she still couldn't believe she was safe enough to hear those words. "I should have told you sooner," she whispered. Shame filled every syllable. I was afraid. I reached for her hand immediately. "I should have seen it sooner." She shook her head. "No." He made sure nobody saw it. Later that night, after Isla and Noah finally fell asleep upstairs, Camille and I sat alone in the kitchen with untouched cups of tea between us. One of Noah's sneakers still sat crooked near the hallway rug where he'd kicked it off earlier. I looked at my daughter carefully. "When did it start?" She stared into her cup for a long moment. "Little things." Her voice sounded distant. Comments about what I wore. Criticizing my friends. Telling me I embarrassed him in public. Then she swallowed hard. "One night during an argument, he shoved me." I closed my eyes briefly. "He apologized afterward," she continued with a hollow laugh. "They always apologize after the first time." The sadness in her voice felt older than exhaustion. "Why didn't you leave?" I asked gently. Her eyes filled instantly. "He said he'd take the kids." I felt my chest tighten. "He told me no judge would believe me. Said he'd make me look unstable. Unfit." She finally looked up at me. And after a while, part of me believed him. I reached across the table and held her hand tightly. "No one deserves that." A tear slid down her cheek. I know that now. Her voice cracked. But honestly, Isla was braver than I was. Upstairs, the floor creaked softly as one of the children moved in bed. Camille smiled faintly through tears. She refused to become afraid of him forever. Outside the kitchen window, dawn slowly began stretching across the sky. That was the first moment I truly believed our family might survive this. Not unchanged, but alive. The following weeks transformed my home completely. Suitcases lined the hallway. School backpacks sat near the stairs. The spare bedrooms finally felt lived in again. But even with Damien gone, his presence still haunted everything. The emergency protective order became a temporary restraining order, while prosecutors reviewed the evidence. Legally, Damien had to stay away. Emotionally, none of us felt safe yet. Then came the next betrayal. My younger daughter Vivian called one Tuesday afternoon. She didn't even say hello. "What have you done, Mom?" Her voice was sharp with anger. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "I've done what needed to be done. Damien called Sebastian last night," she snapped. "He's devastated." Sebastian, Vivian's husband, had always loved Damien. Golf weekends, business lunches, expensive dinners. They'd built their own friendship over the years. A friendship I suddenly saw very differently. "There are things you don't know," I said carefully. "He told us everything," Vivian interrupted. "How you've spent years trying to turn Camille against him. How you manipulated Isla into making false accusations." For a moment I couldn't even speak. "That isn't true." "Really?" she shot back. "Because it looks like you couldn't handle not being the center of attention anymore, so now you're tearing apart a family." The cruelty of it hit harder than I expected. "Vivian," I said slowly, trying to stay calm, "Damien abused them for years. We have photographs, video. Isla witnessed everything. Evidence you probably pushed them into creating." I closed my eyes briefly. "Come here," I said quietly. "Talk to Camille yourself." "I don't need to." Her answer came instantly. "Damien's been part of this family for 25 years. We know him." The irony almost took my breath away. "Do you?" I asked softly. There was a cold pause. "I'm not joining this crusade of yours," Vivian said. "And don't expect us at Thanksgiving dinner if you keep spreading these accusations." Then she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone in disbelief. When I told Camille about the call later, she barely reacted. "He's been preparing for this for years," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" "He builds loyalty everywhere he goes." She folded laundry mechanically while speaking. "Friends, neighbors, family. He makes people trust him long before they ever see who he really is." The exhaustion in her face suddenly looked ancient. "He isolated me slowly," she continued. "First from my friends, then from you. Now he's trying to divide Vivian too. And he was succeeding. Within days, people started avoiding me. Neighbors who once chatted over fences suddenly hurried inside when they saw me coming. At the grocery store, old friends barely made eye contact. Then one morning I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. "False accusations destroy lives. Shame on you." My hand shook as I carried it inside. When I showed Camille, she barely looked surprised. "He's good at being the victim," she said quietly. "Too good. Damien's probably telling everyone his horrible mother-in-law destroyed his family." Camille said it quietly one evening, but she was right. That's exactly what he did. And people believed him. Even my church became part of it. For more than 30 years, that church had been my second home. Potlucks, holiday drives, weddings, funerals. Those people had watched my children grow up. Damien barely attended before any of this happened. Then suddenly he appeared every Sunday. Front row. Perfect suit. Head bowed during prayer like a grieving man carrying unbearable pain. After service, he lingered just long enough to speak softly with people in the lobby. I'd see sympathetic hands on his shoulder while he talked about how much he missed his children, how devastated he was, how false accusations had destroyed his family. And slowly the looks toward me began changing. Whispers followed me through the fellowship hall. Conversations stopped when I approached. One Sunday after service, Celeste Hawthorne cornered me near the church doors. Celeste had been my friend for 20 years. Or at least I thought she had. You need to think carefully about what you're doing, she said gently, lowering her voice like she was offering wisdom instead of judgment. Families can survive misunderstandings if people stop escalating things. It isn't a misunderstanding, I replied sharply. Celeste sighed. Well, Damien seems heartbroken. That word again. Seems. And honestly, Evelyn. She touched my arm delicately. You've changed since Vincent passed. Maybe grief is making you see problems that aren't really there. I stared at her in disbelief. You think bruises are imaginary? She immediately looked uncomfortable. I'm just saying loneliness can affect people. I stepped back from her hand. No, I said quietly. What affects people is realizing someone they trusted is capable of terrible things. Her face tightened. I'm trying to help. No, I repeated. You're trying to make this easier for yourself. After that day, church no longer felt like home. So we stopped going. Another piece of our old life disappeared. The children felt the fallout too. When school started again in September, rumors had already spread ahead of them. Isla came home quieter every day. Noah barely spoke at all anymore. Kids whispered in hallways. Parents stared during pickup. Teachers acted careful around them. Like our family had become something unpleasant, they didn't want to touch directly. One afternoon Isla came home crying. Sabrina said I'm lying about Dad. My heart sank. She said her mom told her I just wanted attention. Camille tried transferring them to another school, but Damien fought it immediately through his lawyer. In our small town, school boundaries weren't easy to escape. Every door felt blocked. Then even my brother Theodore called. Evelyn, he said cautiously, maybe this has gone too far. I nearly laughed from exhaustion. I have photographs, Theo. Video. Testimony. I know, he said carefully. But domestic situations are complicated. Abuse isn't complicated. My voice came out harder than intended. There are always two sides, he insisted. No, I said firmly. Not when someone terrorizes their family. He sighed heavily. Just be careful you aren't destroying relationships the family may need later. After that call, I sat alone in my kitchen realizing something painful. People preferred comforting lies over uncomfortable truth. Especially when the liar smiled politely in public. By October, our world had become very small. Just the five of us. Me, Camille, Isla, Noah, and Genevieve, who never once wavered. Everyone else seemed to drift further away. But inside our little bubble, something unexpected started happening. The house slowly became lighter. Noah started speaking more during dinner. Isla laughed sometimes without immediately apologizing for being loud. And Camille stopped flinching every time a car pulled into the driveway. One evening we stood side by side washing dishes while the children played a board game in the next room. Their laughter floated into the kitchen. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't heard from them in years. Camille paused with a plate still in her hands. Sometimes I wonder if this is worth it, she admitted softly. I looked at her carefully. All the judgment, she continued. The isolation. Losing people. I dried my hands slowly. Do you think it's worth it? She didn't answer immediately. Instead she looked toward the living room where Noah was laughing so hard he nearly knocked over the game board. Then she smiled faintly. For the first time in decades, she whispered. I'm not afraid in my own home. My throat tightened. And the kids aren't afraid either. That was the moment I stopped mourning the people we'd lost. Because peace felt better than approval ever had. The hearing for the permanent restraining order took place in November. Cold gray morning. Heavy clouds. The kind of weather that makes everything feel tense before the day even starts. We pulled into the courthouse parking lot and immediately spotted Damien's black car already there. Camille's grip tightened around her purse. It's going to be okay, I told her. She nodded, but fear still sat plainly in her eyes. 25 years of fear doesn't disappear in a few months. Isla and Noah sat silently in the back seat wearing their nicest clothes. They looked painfully serious for children their age. Serena met us at the courthouse entrance. Remember, she said quietly, stick to facts. Don't react emotionally if he tries provoking you. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Too small. Damien sat beside his attorney at the opposite table. Perfect suit. Perfect posture. Perfect performance. He didn't look at us when we entered, but I noticed the tension in his jaw. Our attorney, Ms. Montclair, stood to greet us warmly. Hiring her had nearly emptied my savings account, but I would have sold the house before risking Camille's future. The judge entered promptly. A stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Damien's lawyer spoke first. Smooth voice. Controlled sympathy. He described Damien as a devoted husband blindsided by manipulative accusations from an overbearing mother-in-law who had never accepted him. Mr. Ashford is a respected member of this community, he said confidently. These false allegations have already damaged his reputation, his career, and his relationship with his children. I glanced toward Damien. He sat there with his head slightly lowered, looking exhausted and wounded, like a man suffering unfairly. I suddenly understood how he fooled people for so long. Then Ms. Montclair stood, and the room changed. This is not a family disagreement, she said calmly. This is long-term domestic abuse. No dramatics. No theatrics. Just facts. One by one she presented everything. The photographs. Medical records. The dates. Isla's testimony. The years of documented fear. And finally, the video. The courtroom fell completely silent as Damien's screaming voice echoed through the speakers. On the courtroom screen, Damien looked nothing like the charming man people knew from church dinners and neighborhood barbecues. His face twisted with rage as he screamed at Camille. His fist slammed into the wall inches from her head, while Noah shrank into the corner trembling. The room went completely silent. I looked toward the judge. Her expression had hardened noticeably. But then I noticed movement behind us in the gallery. I turned slightly. Vivian sat there frozen in her seat, her face drained of color. For the first time since all this began, she looked like someone finally waking up from a long, terrible mistake. When the video ended, Damien's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, context matters here, he said smoothly. This was clearly an emotional moment taken out of. Let me stop you there. The judge's voice sliced cleanly through the courtroom. There is no context that makes this acceptable. A silence followed that even Damien's lawyer couldn't recover from immediately. Then Camille took the stand. At first her voice shook. But as she spoke, something changed. Years of fear slowly gave way to truth. She described the insults that became control. The control that became intimidation. The intimidation that became violence. She spoke about walking on eggshells for decades, about hiding bruises from her children while pretending everything was normal, about teaching herself how to smile in public no matter what happened at home. And sitting there listening to her, I realized how much strength my daughter had carried all these years without anyone truly seeing it. Then it was Damien's turn. He walked to the stand calm and polished, every inch the wounded husband. I regret losing my temper in that video, he said carefully. But it was an isolated incident during a stressful moment. He even lowered his voice at the right moments. Perfectly measured. My mother-in-law has spent years turning my family against me, he continued. I just want my wife and children back where they belong. The judge studied him closely. Mr. Ashford, she said, do you deny the injuries shown in these photographs? For the first time all morning Damien hesitated. Camille is clumsy, he said finally. She falls. Walks into things. The judge's expression didn't move. For over 20 years? His attorney immediately jumped in. Your Honor, many of these photos lack proper context or verification. That's not true. The voice came from behind us. Every head turned. Vivian stood slowly from the gallery, visibly shaking. My heart nearly stopped. Your Honor, she said quietly, I need to say something. The judge studied her for a moment before nodding. Approach. Vivian walked forward, clutching her purse tightly. As she passed me, she gave me the briefest glance. Apology filled her eyes. My name is Vivian Sterling, she began. Camille is my sister. Her voice trembled badly at first. Last Christmas, I walked into the kitchen and saw Damien grabbing her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Damien's head snapped toward her. I confronted him later, Vivian continued, and he told me if I ever talked about it, I'd lose access to the children. The courtroom remained completely still. Then Vivian pulled out her phone. I took a picture that day. Her eyes filled with tears. I was too afraid to say anything before. But I can't stay silent anymore. And that was the moment Damien finally lost control. You're lying. He shot halfway out of his chair so violently it scraped across the courtroom floor. This is a setup. Mr. Ashford, the judge warned sharply. Sit down immediately. But his mask was already gone. 25 years of carefully crafted charm shattered in seconds. I've put up with this family for decades, he shouted. His face looked exactly like it had in the video, red with fury, wild-eyed. He pointed directly at Camille. You think you can leave me? He yelled. You're nothing without me. Nothing. Isla gasped beside me. Security officers rushed forward immediately. Damien kept shouting while they restrained him, furious words echoing through the courtroom as they dragged him toward the doors. And for the first time, everyone saw him exactly as he truly was. No performance. No polished smile. Just rage. Pure and ugly. The judge watched silently until the doors closed behind him. Then she looked at the rest of us. I already knew the decision before she spoke. An hour later, we stood outside the courthouse beneath a cold gray sky holding the signed permanent restraining order. Camille exhaled like she'd finally been allowed to breathe after decades underwater. Vivian approached slowly. Her eyes were swollen from crying. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have believed you. Camille stared at her for one long moment. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her sister. Watching them hold each other, I felt something inside our broken family begin healing at last. Not perfectly, not instantly, but honestly. The silence that protected Damien for so many years was finally gone. And once truth came out, there was no putting it back. Spring arrived 6 months later. The air smelled like fresh rain and turned soil. Camille knelt beside me in the garden, one sunny afternoon planting tulip bulbs into the flower beds we'd rebuilt together. The sunlight caught silver strands in her hair I didn't remember seeing before. But she looked lighter now, freer. These tulips are going to be beautiful, she said, patting dirt gently around the bulbs. Just like the gardener, I teased. She laughed softly. Real laughter. The kind that reached her eyes. I still wasn't used to hearing it. The restraining order had already been extended twice after Damien violated it. Once through threatening messages. Once after trying to approach Isla outside school. Each violation only strengthened the case against him. The divorce proceedings dragged on, but Camille had a strong attorney, and Damien's courtroom explosion hadn't impressed the judge overseeing custody. The house they once shared had been sold. Camille placed her portion into education funds for the children. Healing came slowly. Some nights Camille still woke from nightmares. Noah occasionally retreated into silence for days at a time. Isla still flinched at sudden movements she didn't expect. Trauma doesn't disappear just because someone escapes it. But life kept moving forward anyway. Noah joined a science club and finally found teachers who encouraged him instead of frightening him. Isla started therapy and slowly began trusting people again. And Camille, my daughter, returned to school. After 25 years, she enrolled in community college classes to finish the degree Damien once convinced her to abandon. She even started helping other women in town who quietly lived through situations far too similar to hers. One afternoon the doorbell rang while we worked in the garden. Vivian stood there holding a casserole dish awkwardly. Lasagna, she said nervously. The good kind. Extra cheese. Things between us still weren't perfect. Trust takes time to rebuild. But Vivian kept showing up. And that mattered. Perfect timing, I said warmly. We're starving. Inside, Isla sat at the dining table helping Noah with his science project while sunlight poured through the windows. For a moment, I simply stood there watching them. Safe, laughing, healing. And I realized something important. People like Damien survive because silence protects them. But silence loses its power the moment someone brave enough finally tells the truth. The kids looked up when Vivian walked into the dining room carrying the casserole dish. Their expressions were cautious, careful, but no longer afraid. Aunt Vivian brought lasagna, I announced. Noah immediately looked interested. With extra cheese? Vivian smiled nervously. And garlic bread. I remembered that's your favorite. For the first time in months, I saw a genuine grin flicker across Noah's face. Tiny, quick, but real. Vivian blinked hard, clearly fighting tears. Dinner that night wasn't perfect. Sometimes conversations stalled. Sometimes silence settled over the table when certain subjects drifted too close. But it was an honest silence now. Not the frightened kind we used to live with. As I looked around the table, I realized something remarkable. We were still here. Bruised. Changed. But together. And somehow, after everything, we were building something stronger than what had existed before. After dinner, Vivian helped me wash dishes while the others cleaned the living room. For a while, we worked quietly side by side beneath the warm kitchen light. Then she finally spoke. I should have noticed, she whispered. Her hand stayed submerged in the dishwater as she stared downward. All those years, I should have known something was wrong. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We all miss things. She shook her head. But you didn't. I thought back to that Sunday lunch. The bruise on Camille's arm. The look in Isla's eyes. The moment every small memory suddenly connected into something impossible to ignore. I wish I'd seen it sooner, I admitted quietly. And I meant it. Every single day I wished it. But regret couldn't change the past. What matters, I said softly, is that eventually we stopped pretending. Vivian wiped at her eyes quickly. We broke the silence before it destroyed all of them. Later that evening, after Vivian went home and the children settled upstairs, Camille and I sat together on the porch swing. The spring air smelled like fresh grass and rain. Fireflies blinked softly across the yard, while the neighborhood settled into nighttime quiet. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then suddenly Camille smiled to herself. I got offered a job today. I turned toward her. At the community center, she said. Part-time. Working with women in the domestic violence outreach program. Pride hit me so fast it nearly brought tears to my eyes. That's wonderful. She leaned back slowly, staring out into the dark yard. You know, she said quietly, I used to think my life was over. The sadness in her voice sounded distant now, like something she was finally leaving behind. I thought surviving each day was the best I could hope for. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. Clear-eyed. Steady. I was wrong. I squeezed her hand gently. Yes, I said. You were. A year earlier, I never could have imagined this moment. My daughter free. My grandchildren healing. Our shattered family slowly finding its way back together piece by piece. The road there had cost us more than I ever expected. Friends. Comfort. Illusions. But sitting beside Camille beneath the soft glow of the porch light, I understood something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The truth had nearly destroyed our family, but in the end it also gave us a chance to rebuild it honestly. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to stay silent any longer.